to cover all their bases a little bit. You can't really blame them, though, because they've built out a roster that allows them to do that. They have specific weaknesses to address. They've done that a little bit with Darius Slay and coming in at cornerback, who's on the downside a little bit of his career, but a good value trade for them. So you can't really criticize them and say they missed an opportunity, because it's not like they had, like the Packers or the big team we came out of last week, where they desperately needed wide receiver help in the deepest wide receiver class ever being argued, by some people at least, and they didn't pick a single wide receiver. Like, that's a criticism. What the Eagles did was intriguing more than something you need to criticize.
Yeah, okay. There was talk that the Green Bay Packers were in for various wide receivers, but that they kept getting picked just before them. That's why the 49ers traded up to pick their wide receiver in the first round. And so it wasn't that they just felt like they weren't going to rush into picking a wide receiver they didn't want at a value that they thought was wrong. And I can see the merits of that. Ronan, what was your takeaway before we get into the big free agent stories that have happened and the cuts that have happened in the aftermath of the draft?
Yeah, I think the Eagles is really interesting. It's obviously been thrown into the same category as the Packers one, but I think Jalen Hurts makes a lot of sense for them. It's not as if there were tons and tons of beneficial players at that pick, so it's like a project for them. And Howie Roseman says he wants to turn that into like a QB factory, so this is a perfect chance to do that. Carson Wentz is going to be their guy, and Charles Robinson from Yahoo said the Eagles believe Hurts can be Taysom Hill on steroids, in inverted commas. So that's what they're going to be playing him.
It's America. You've got to put those. You got to do that. That's. I mean, they've got a different attitude over there.
Absolutely. And Marty Mornhinweg, who was the Ravens' offensive guy when Lamar Jackson first came in, is now an assistant with the Eagles. So you can definitely imagine they're going to be finding little wrinkles for him.
Wasn't he the one that they wanted to turn him into a wide receiver, though? Is that not the same guy?
Yeah, ultimately there was he's out of the building, Ger, so you can infer from that what you will. But I think they kind of came to an arrangement that they'd get Lamar involved. And Joe Flacco wasn't too happy about that. I think you'll remember his sort of po-faced demeanour standing out wide while Lamar Jackson came in to run some plays. But I think Jalen Hurts, as Cian said, not the breakout athlete that Lamar Jackson is by any means, but I think he can affect stuff. And the AFC West is going to be really interesting as well, because like people have looked at the Kansas City Chiefs and seen the speed that they've brought to the table, and the Raiders and the Broncos have both said, yeah, we're going to follow suit there, and they've drafted some real speedsters last week. And obviously the Chargers had an unbelievable wide receiving core anyway, so whether they can hit the ground running with the new QB remains to be seen. But the AFC West should be very intriguing.
Yeah, okay. The families, the dead animals in the Minnesota head coach's wall, the dog who is very much alive in the kitchen of the the greatest coach of all time. Yeah. Like, did any of this make a difference? Everyone's like, oh, it's nice that these very weird human beings who never spend any time with their families are now forced to spend time with their families. Maybe they might realise that families are important to people. Is this going to happen again?
Well, that was a storyline coming out of the draft, actually. A couple of coaches said it on the record, and it was widely then reported anonymously, because NFL coaches who expect everyone around them to be as brave can be, are scared of doing anything on the record a lot of the time. They came out saying that this is the way forward, that this is the way the draft should be done, because they want to spend more time with their families and they're reassessing how they work. And I've always believed this, that like Belichick has never been the one who comes out and says, oh, I work 22 hours a day, I work 16 hours a day and sleep once every week. He's never been the guy who comes out and says all this and gets really mad all the time and is always worked up and always stressed. Belichick, the best coach, and John Harbaugh's the same. Sean Payton, maybe a little bit in the other direction, but overall is still probably in that same area. None of these guys are these insane psychopaths. I have to be committed to my job 99% of the time. Nothing else matters except football. All of them have a perspective, and all of them understand, hey, we work a certain amount of time, we work in the right way, we work well, and we get the job done. It's the guys, generally, it's the guys who prove to be bad coaches are the guys who are ones who are too far into the project. There's a great picture going around of Matt Nagy in his room where he's got 10 million different posters and play designs and different stats up on the walls all around him, and he's just clearly trying way too hard. And then you've got Belichick sat in his kitchen table with his dog sitting on the chair next to him, just with nothing around him, on the phone going, yeah, I think we'll tread back. Like, there's no reason for these coaches to be as stressed and crazy as they are. It's just the culture of the way they've gone to get to the point that they've gotten to, and they keep going that way. Hopefully this draft changes the way they think, but you would have thought by now, seeing all the health problems so many of them have, that they would have gone and changed before now anyway.
Yeah, I can't see that much changing. Although John Lynch did a piece with Peter King where he was saying that, you know, they're going to get their scouts to do far more stuff remotely, because at the end of the season, when the scouts have been on the road for 30 weeks of the year, they bring them all together for like, it's great for team morale, and it's like another week away from their families. And instead of doing that, they're actually going to try and get them to have some work-life balance. Look, let's move on, because there's a couple of things that we want to talk about here. This piece was recorded before the lockdown, but Cian and Ronan, I want to get your thoughts on it. How would a complete rookie get on against experienced American football players? Have a look at this.
If you thought Super Bowl 54 was the last we've seen of American football in Ireland, then you're wrong.
Look, we're playing the SBC. I like that against the SBC. We're going to strike a win from the offense 6-7 fucking home.
The helmets might make American football seem like soft boys rugby, but to the Castleknock-based West Dublin Rhinos, even training is tough, competitive and physical. So, how would a complete noob face in practice? To find out, we got our guinea pig Daniel to suit up.
They're the big boys and they seem to be hitting hard, so let's see how it goes. And I'm hoping they're going to need a wide receiver after this.
So, you want to be a wide receiver? Well, if you're going to get that far, you're going to have to impress the team's offensive coordinator, Stephen O'Rourke.
Training sessions usually entail, usually full contact.
Yeah, by the end it's full contact. We tend to come in, we'll warm up, then we'll work with the individual positions. So the offensive and defensive lines will work on their own, the running backs will work on their own, the receivers will work on their own, and the defensive players, and then everyone will come together slowly but surely. So yeah.
And so to get started, it's time to learn some routes. Well, he certainly seems focused. Not bad. Let's see what Stephen thinks.
We had to work on his footwork a little bit, but that's fine. He was brand new to the game, but he's doing everything right. It'll be interesting to see him when there's a defence against him, but we'll see that in a few minutes.
Yeah, he's had it easy because he's been wide open to catch a few passes, but at least he's got good hands.
He does, yeah, but it is a lot easier to catch a ball when you're surrounded by air than when there's a 200-pound man trying to kill you. So,
What do you expect what's going to happen when he's around the defence?
he just won't get open as quickly as he probably thinks he will. They're probably going to play press because they're going to see he's a rookie. So they'll be a bit tighter than they would normally be, so that space, he's going to have to fight for it. But if he gets there, he's got the hands to catch the ball.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a different ball game altogether when I have someone actually marking me. I think the biggest mistake so far was not bringing a spare pair of pants like these.
Yeah, nice trousers, Dan. Now, let's see how he fares when he has defenders to beat. Oh, struggling for space there. He can tackle though. Sure you don't want to be a linebacker, Dan? Oh, so close. Let's see that again. There you go now. You're really getting stuck in. So, after a long, cold morning in practice, what is the coach's verdict?
So how do you think I did?
Well, you did really well. I mean, you got the fundamentals right in terms of your starting position. You got your blocks off in terms of on the run plays. You were open on a couple of passing plays. Quarterbacks just didn't see it. All in all, for a rookie session, I thought you did really well. How did you find it?
I actually really enjoyed it. Again, I think I flattered to deceive a bit till there was someone in front of me pushing me and running after me.
Oh, you did really well. And like I said, you're more than welcome and come back anytime you want.
Yeah, if you need a wide receiver.
Excellent. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very
Cheers.
much. Appreciate it, Stephen.
All right, well done to the DCU crowd who put that together. We'll give you the full credit list on all of our social channels as well. You can watch that back. Yeah, look, I mean, turns out it is a game for all shapes and sizes. Cian, where are we going next?
He's a brave man, I give him that. Like the rugby, we always do the thing where we say, rugby benefits so much from having Gaelic football. It didn't seem to translate there, I don't think. But this is actually a kind of a very relevant thing, though, because like while obviously DCU boys there are doing this at a very extreme level and taking someone who's never played football, it's very relevant for this time of the year because this is exactly what draft people are doing. This is exactly what NFL teams are doing, taking guys from college. And the best example I have from watching the last week is Michael Pittman, who is a very important player. Like every year, the draft has the top picks, and it comes down a set order, and you think, oh, these guys are in order of importance, but they're not. It's about where you land and how much of an impact you can immediately have. And the Colts wide receiver spots, because they got Phillip Rivers, because they have an overall team that's good enough to go into the playoffs, that wide receiver spots were hugely important for them. So they traded their first-round pick for DeForest Buckner to the 49ers. So they passed in the first round. That means they skipped on Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb. Those are the options they had, which led them to Michael Pittman. And Michael Pittman's a fascinating draft pick on his own, and he's even more fascinating now where he landed. So he's 6'4". He's 234 pounds. So he's a monster. He looks like a tight end and he moves like a tight end, but he's going to play wide receiver. And the Colts love him, and Frank Reich talked this week about how he's going to win loads of jump balls for them and how they really love that ability that he has. But that's a very, very different thing. And you kind of saw on that clip we just watched where the ball was being thrown up in the air and two guys going up, and one of them was looked a little bit more had an understanding of how he went to get the ball because he played football a lot more, to the new guy who was going in and kind of didn't really understand how to get in the right body position. That's kind of what Michael Pittman has now going into the NFL. He's got to figure out how to... No, it's no longer good enough just being taller than everyone else. He's got to figure out how to get in the right positions, how to work his leverage. He's going to be in that Devin Funchess role for the Colts. And it's crucial for the Colts because they had Phillip Rivers last year, who had Mike Williams, who he relied on constantly, where he was just throwing the ball up. And Mike Williams was further along in his development, so he understood how to adjust to all these passes. So the NFL and American football in general is this sport where everyone's always adding layers, everyone's always learning, everyone's always developing. None of these guys, it's not really like soccer or American football, or sorry, not American football, Gaelic football or hurling, where you can have these young superstars come in and know everything straight away. Those are extremely rare in American football.
Yeah. One last thing before we move on, because to tie this back around to where we were going, everybody's obviously obsessed with what you do with Patrick Mahomes, and we saw that in the draft. We saw so many teams kind of aping what the Kansas City Chiefs have done, particularly in their division. We've seen teams try and respond by adding as much pace as they possibly can. Is there a possibility that Patrick Mahomes bestrides the NFL like Michael Jordan, that he's that level of a talent, and that we're watching now him having overcome so early in his career that mountain that it took Jordan 6 years to get to, that this is the beginning of something that we've never seen before? Because it feels to me he is as good as anything that the sport has ever had, because it's a combination. He's kind of this kind of weird prescient combination of the best running QB as you need to be, all the skill set that Tom Brady and Joe Montana had, but combined in a way that not even Lamar has.
Well, here's where we've got to start with this, Ger. Name the one to beat.
Mahomes.
No, sorry. Name who is the Michael Jordan right now for the NFL. Who is the guy that everyone points to and says he's the greatest player ever?
Tom Brady.
But he's not. Jerry Rice is. That's the difficulty of the NFL. If some people will say Jerry Rice, everyone will say Tom Brady, other people will say Joe Montana, and the NFL has so many players, and they're also a lot of times faceless players. They don't become brands the way Jordan and LeBron have become brands. So the reason I would think it's very difficult is that's just not the way football works. Culture-wise, there's a lot more argument, there's a lot less individual. And I think, like, the way I would put this, and the way I wouldn't disagree with you that Mahomes is capable of that. I think he's at that level. But he's coming off a quarterback era. It's considered the best era of quarterbacks ever, with Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers. There's four guys straight away off the top who are all incredibly good. So you had Jordan from the previous era, who LeBron had to catch, and that was pretty much it. There were obviously other great players there, but there wasn't really one who stood out. The problem with football is you can't narrow it down to one person and say that great beat him. So many different points direct.
Yeah, okay. Your lines broke up a little bit at the end there. So there's a couple of bits of news that we need to get to here, Ronan, that we should talk about. The Giants have picked up a couple of their options that they had to. Jabril Peppers and Evan Ingram. Andy Dalton has been released. O.J. Howard's option was picked up, which was interesting. Presumably they're going to trade him. Let's start with the release of Andy Dalton. I'm a little bit surprised, I've got to say, Ronan. I thought that actually, given that you have a relatively cheap, although he's the first overall pick, so he's not completely cheap, quarterback. He's cheap in quarterback terms. And Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton's this amazing insurance for you if there is any slowness in Joe Burrow, if there's an injury to Joe Burrow, if there's stuff that you haven't discovered just yet because you haven't really had the opportunity to spend that much time with him. Keep Andy Dalton until week 3, week 4, when some team suddenly has a massive urge to get a mediocre quarterback because their QB has gone down with injury. It just seems like there was no real point in letting him go right now.
Yeah, and it was highly publicised, I think, about 2 months ago at this stage that they were willing to trade Andy Dalton, and there were obviously no takers because, bizarrely, this has become quite a stacked quarterback class of unemployed people, basically. So Joe Flacco, Super Bowl winner, has no job. Cam Newton, or MVP and Super Bowl, appeared in the Super Bowl, obviously. He has no team either. And Andy Dalton, while, he's consistent, in 2015 he had a really good season and has always started, hasn't succumbed to many injuries, has always been a safe pair of hands. But the Patriots have always been pegged as a landing spot for him. Even Peter King said it at the end of March that he could see Andy Dalton ending up there. But I think Belichick and co have basically looked at Jared Stidham and thought, we're going to go with this guy because he's got the sort of movement that we've been robbed of with Tom Brady. While Tom Brady is metronomic in his passing, we haven't been able to move with the times in terms of what Mahomes does and what Lamar does. So they might try that for 1 year with Stidham and just see how they get on, because I'm sure Josh McDaniels has plenty up his sleeve in terms of little wrinkles he can throw into the playbook. So I think Andy Dalton might find himself a little bit frustrated. He mightn't find a job. Jameis Winston, I thought, was the most interesting one, that he turned down $4 and $5 million from other teams to be their backups, basically backing himself to go to the Saints and thinking maybe Drew Brees. Like, there was a lot of talk that Drew Brees was going to take a co-commentary job in this offseason. He has actually signed up for NBC. He's going to take over from Chris Collinsworth in a couple of years. But I think Jameis Winston's probably looking at that situation, seeing what happened with Teddy Bridgewater and thinking, I could probably nick that job by the time Drew Brees steps away. Because Jameis Winston has unbelievable talent. His activities off the field obviously leave a lot to be desired. But in terms of what he can bring to the park, I think he's one of the more exciting players. And Sean Payton will fancy his chances of ironing out the kinks that sort of derailed his prospects as a pro so far.
Well, let's talk about these two together then, Cian. I know you've been looking at a bit of Winston tape. You thought it was pretty bad, the amount of time that he holds on to it. Why is Winston getting a job? Is it simply that he's willing to take it for $1 million and Andy Dalton currently doesn't have anything?
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if Jameis Winston had other offers. I think he's been out there for 2 months. He's been looking for jobs. He hasn't been able to get any. I think it's the Saints gave him the best deal he could get, which was a minimum deal. I don't really buy into the idea of him rebuilding his brand or rebuilding his player profile there, because, for one, he's only going to play if Drew Brees gets hurt, and even then, Taysom Hill is probably ahead of him. It's not like the Saints had no money. They gave Taysom Hill money. They could have given Jameis Winston more money. He was going to be the backup. He's going to be the third string there to me. Like, last year, he could have intercepted 50 times, and that's not an exaggeration. That's something I've gone and looked at. He had 51 passes that could have been intercepted last year. That's an insane number for a guy who already had 30. Normally, if you throw 30, you think you've been unlucky. He was quite lucky while only throwing 30. I think he's a massive obstacle to winning games. He's probably going to be out of the league in 12 months. Andy Dalton, I don't think Andy Dalton is pretty good. Like, Andy Dalton 4 or 5 years ago was fine. Was the guy everyone pointed was an average quarterback. He inherited that label from Alex Smith, and he worked.
We'll dial you back and we'll get your Andy Dalton hot take in just a second. I've got to say, I'm a bit surprised, Ronan, that if you're the Bengals, you don't just keep Andy Dalton for a couple of months. Like, it's going to cost you a bit of money, but not that much money. Why not just do that?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I wonder, is it anything from Andy Dalton's side of things where he wants a fresh challenge, and maybe I think he probably feels a little bit irked by the narrative around him, as Cian was alluding to there, that he's like a game manager. He's had 9 winning seasons, and I know from personal experience he's walked into Baltimore a couple of times and been very clutch, closed out games against very good Ravens teams. So he's a good player, and if he can maneuver his way into New England, I'd like to see what he could do with a competent coach and GM. So I don't know. I think Andy Dalton still has something to offer. He's definitely more of a team player than the likes of Jameis. I think other teams will be willing to have him into their building. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, like he's going to be a good backup. Again, it's somebody who the Eagles could happily have had sitting on their bench for a certain amount of time, and they must have thought that he was either going to be available for free or for like a handful of magic beans with the 7th round pick from 2022 if they wanted to get him under control for anything. I mean, it would have been a money issue trading for that contract, but you could have done a deal with Dalton to take a pay cut in advance of that trade happening. So I don't know, it does seem strange that here's somebody who's relatively competent is not available, is not being kept by the Bengals in the first place and then is not being snapped up by somebody quicker.
Yeah, and you see some of the jobs that have been filled, like the one that baffles me is Philip Rivers at the Colts. I don't know what the Colts think they're getting there. I was a big Philip Rivers fan a couple of years ago, but he looked sort of shot-worn to me last year, and they've paid him big money for a one-year deal. Again, alluding to what I was saying about Breeze, Philip Rivers was being linked with Monday Night Football co-commentary, and I'm sure ESPN were bringing a lot of money to the table, but I'd say they were the only competition the Colts had for Philip Rivers. And if it was me personally, I would prefer to have Brissett, who's already in the Colts building. I'd prefer to have Andy Dalton, and I would prefer to have Cam Newton, who seems to be, like, I'd be worried if I was Cam Newton that he is such a price point. I can't see him taking $1.1 million, so I don't know where he's going to end up. And it's quite worrying that a player of his ability might be sort of driven out of the league.
Cian, give us your last thought on Andy Dalton before I ask you about Cam quickly.
Well, I agree with what Ron just said, but the Colts 48 million quarterbacks. He's been the last few years. He used to be the average quarterback. I think it makes sense for the Patriots because they don't have great options, but they also built to let him just be a manager because they have that run game, have a great defense.
Okay. We'll take you back on the phone. Sorry for everybody who's watching this live streamed here, but we'll get Cian's thoughts on the phone. Briefly then, some of the other news that we wanted to talk about. The Giants have picked up Evan Ingram and Jabril Peppers. I heard a lot of praise for the Giants draft. Dave Gettleman obviously comes in for a lot of criticism, but it seems like that criticism is it's a bit of backlash against it, it's fair to say, in the last 2 weeks. And the picks that he's made as a talent evaluator, PFF, were giving him a very high grade for that, and they've kind of said that he's managed to remake that defence in terms of giving themselves plenty of different pieces together. Evan Ingram is like a transcendent talent if he can stay fit as well. So, if Danny Dimes is actually a above average or average quarterback, then suddenly the Giants have enough pieces to be a reasonable team.
Yeah, and Joe Judge, I remember when we did this show after he was appointed, I was baffled that some of the names that were being thrown around. Granted, they didn't take Jason Garrett, which was obviously beneficial, but they went for Joe Judge, who was relatively unproven. But I've been impressed by how he's dealt with things, in terms of player personnel. And in these two instances, like Ingram and Peppers, 25 and 24 respectively, it's kind of like a prove-it situation for those. Just pick up the fifth-year options and with a new coach sort of go there and show what you can do, because Daniel Jones is going to take this team forward. And Eli Manning is a great player. He's probably going to go into the Hall of Fame, but he held him back for a couple of years there in all reality. So this is a chance for a fresh slate on all fronts. And I think, this is a good start for them. They're a solid draft. So did the Jets. So New York football might make something of a comeback. It remains to be seen. So, I think Joe Judge, I'm looking forward to seeing what he actually does. Like, it's very easy to be good in press conferences, but like as Bill O'Brien has shown, if you're good in press conferences, doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach. Yeah,
maybe Bill O'Brien is a good coach. It's just
he's a bad GM.
That's the thing.
He might be a good coach, but he's definitely a terrible GM because we've seen the Hopkins trade. It's just blown up in his face, and even the Laramie Tunsil thing, where I could see the need to protect Deshaun Watson, but he gave up the whole house basically to get this guy and didn't negotiate a contract with him before the draft or before the trade was made, and now they've been bent over a barrel by this guy. And I just think, as Cian said at the start of this show, the hours that go into being a coach alone, let alone being a GM. I know Belichick does it, but I'd say his drafting has sort of left a little bit to be desired, So I think it's probably Bill O'Brien has taken too much on here. And it reminds me a bit of what Chip Kelly did with the Eagles when he got rid of LaShawn McCoy, and everyone thought, he's got a grand plan here, he's building for the future. In retrospect, he didn't. He panicked, he brought DeMarco Murray in, and that project blew up in his face. Similarly here, Bill O'Brien got rid of Hopkins. You're thinking, what is he going to do? Is he going to draft some of these brilliant young receivers in the draft? But no, he went and got Randall Cobb on ridiculous money. And then, I'm not sure about the Bill O'Brien project. He's a good coach, but I think he needs to hand the reins of general manager over to somebody else.
Yeah, it helps when you have a general manager who actually can negotiate things like taking Trent Williams for, again, a handful of magic beans. That was a good signing, Cian. Assuming Trent Williams' health issues are over and the year out of football has not seen him suddenly forget how to play football, getting a Pro Bowl left tackle for a third and a fifth, and if he leaves, it's you get your fifth back anyway. So it's a third for a full season and the opportunity to negotiate with him long term. That was a good move by the 49ers.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in that advert from about 10 years ago, and the guy standing in the ocean shouting, "Can you hear me now?" with the way the show is going. But Trent Williams, I was really excited about that move when he was going to be the left guard inside Joe Staley, because that would have been one of the most dominant lines in the league. I think that would have, that fit with Kyle Shanahan as run blocking would have been incredible. Now he's replacing Joe Staley. It's a little bit of the shine gone off it, but it's still a huge move, because Trent Williams, when healthy, when available, when wanting to play, and those aren't, that's not a qualifier I'm using as a negative on Trent Williams. He was right to not want to be in Washington, the way they treated him, the way they misdiagnosed his health issues. He was absolutely right to force his way out of there. So when he's available, when he's on the right track, when he's focused in that team, he's going to be one of the best left tackles in the league again. And that's going to be a huge difference maker for the 49ers. The 49ers have had a great offseason. They got Brandon Ayuk, who's a really good wide receiver. They got the first pick, Jamon Kinlaw, who's going to replace DeForest Buckner, not perfectly, but enough for them, the defense, to remain effective. So I'm really excited about where the 49ers are going. It's just that same question mark with me all the time with the quarterback there. So, but they did the maximum of what they could have done this offseason to try and catch the Chiefs and the Ravens ahead of them.
Yeah, and look, that's kind of all you can hope for. But it just to compare and contrast with, say, the situation in Houston, famously the Shanahans don't get on with Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington team, and there was no way that a deal was going to be done last year when they inquired about Trent Williams. But John Lynch has a long-standing relationship with the new coach at Washington, and so he was able to make a deal with Riverboat Ron, because apparently they were camp counsellors as teenagers together, and they knew each other all the way back to the time that they were kids. Like, this shit, it turns out, is stuff that you can't analyse because you don't know what happens in the background, but suddenly a deal happens and everybody goes, why did that deal happen when it couldn't happen up to this point? And maybe Bill O'Brien needs a John Lynch in his life.
Yeah, but Washington also just screwed themselves there, really, because a year ago they could have got a first-round pick. Like, a year ago, before all the nonsense happened and before the ego of Dan Snyder was there, forcing them to hold on to Trent Williams, trying to win the battle of wills, all of that ruined his trade value. So once the price went down, the value became great. But yeah, like you talk about these relationships, John Lynch, he's someone who has done a really, really good job with Kyle Shanahan, and he's someone who's done a really good job coming from a place that no one really expects him to do a really good job. He was obviously a famous football player, a great football player, but coming from TV, there was a lot of skepticism with him, and it's the complete opposite situation of the Texans, where Bill O'Brien is a dictator, basically, and Bill O'Brien gets to do what he wants no matter what. And one of the clips coming out of the draft is Bill O'Brien getting very angry at his computer for not working, and it feels like that's what Bill O'Brien has been doing for the last 2 years, getting angry and getting rid of something. And most of the time it's players, very talented players.
Yeah, I'm surprised that hasn't become a meme or a gif just yet. Last thing, O.J. Howard, you want to talk about this? This is obviously very interesting. If they decide to keep O.J. Howard, which I would be surprised if they did keep O.J. Howard, but they would have O.J. Howard and Gronk, and all of a sudden, for the first time, Tom Brady has we've also got Cameron Brate. He would have a lot of tight ends to throw the ball to if he so desired. What do you expect to happen here? Why are they keeping him? Why are they exercising this option?
So picking up the option was curious to me, because so the way this works is Bruce Arians has a very specific type of offense that he wants to run. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to run it, because Tom Brady is not really a fit in that offense. But let's take the idea that Bruce Arians is going to run this offense he's always run. He wants a Heath Miller tight end. He wants a Dwayne Allen tight end. He wants someone who's going to block. That's not what O.J. Howard is. O.J. Howard is an Aaron Hernandez type of tight end. I should really get a better example instead of using Aaron Hernandez, but that's the best example of the move tight end. Travis Kelce is probably a better option. So he is a guy like O.J. Howard there who wants to be out and receiving and running routes. He does not want to be in blocking defensive ends. He's not built for that. Never has been. He was actually at Alabama, was put in a similar miscast role there where he blocked too much as well. So now that he's got these three tight ends, Cameron Brate and Rob Gronkowski fit perfectly with what Bruce Arians wants to do. But you can't have three tight ends on the field. So the only way this is going to work for the Buccaneers immediately is if O.J. Howard plays slot receiver, which would make sense a little bit, even though he's not that much of a receiver. He's more of a tight end, a pass-catching tight end. So it's a very fascinating thing the way it's going to shake out, because they have so much talent there. They're not just going to drop someone. The only way this made sense to me initially was if one of Howard or Brate was going to be traded when they got Gronk. But that doesn't seem to be going to happen. There was no suggestion of it during the draft. There was no suggestion at the time of the Gronkowski trade. And now they've picked up the option. So either this is a great bluff to maximize the value in a trade, or they've got a new idea for O.J. Howard. He can't fit the role he played last year.
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if there were a few fairly rapid-fire trades coming in the next few days. Or does everybody go quiet and go dark now? Is this the end of the news cycle, really, from the NFL for a couple of months?
Well, I think a lot of the big questions are not being able to get guys in for physicals. I think that's probably why Everson Griffin hasn't been signed. I think that's probably why Cam hasn't been signed. And making trades then becomes a bigger risk because you can't get the physical on the guy. Jacoby Brissett is the one for me. It doesn't make sense that he's going to be a backup. It doesn't make sense that he's trapped behind Phillip Rivers. There's huge value there. The Patriots would love to have him, I assume. So I think a deal gets worked out there. I think he absolutely, once August, like, assuming we get back to some sort of normality, I think once August comes around, training camp starts, preseason games, you get a better look at Stidham, you get a better idea of what your roster is going to be. I think that's when you get a trade between those two teams.
All right. Good stuff. Cian, thanks very much for being with us this week. Thanks to you as well, Ronan, and to everybody for watching on this week's edition of The Snap. Remember, you can sign up to our American football newsletter, OTB Club Gridiron. We'll get the very latest from The Snap, the latest American football news from both Ireland and the USA from offtheball.com, podcasts as well as both long and short form video, and more stuff from American Football Ireland coming your way over the next while. Sign up, offtheball.com/Club Gridiron. See you next week. Best of luck.